Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
The restaurant was buzzing with conversation, the low hum of laughter and clinking glasses filling the air as servers weaved between tables, balancing plates of steak, pasta, and overpriced appetizers that would be picked at more for show than hunger. I sat near the middle of the long table, wedged between an aunt I barely spoke to and my younger cousin who was too busy scrolling through her phone to acknowledge my presence, listening half-heartedly as my family caught up on everything I had no time to be a part of. It had been a long day, an even longer week, and as I sat there nursing my second glass of wine, feeling the exhaustion settle into my bones, I couldn't help but wonder why I had agreed to come in the first place. I already knew how this night would go. I would sit there, smile politely, listen to stories about lavish vacations, expensive shopping sprees, and effortless success while I quietly calculated how much overtime I needed to work to cover next month's bills. Across the table, Lauren was in her element, the center of attention as she dramatically recounted her latest shopping haul, waving her perfectly manicured hands as she laughed, her expensive gold bracelet catching the light, drawing even more eyes to her. She had always been good at this, always known how to command a room, how to keep everyone hanging on to her words like she was something special, like she was someone worth envying. And, of course, she continued, flipping her hair over her shoulder, I just had to get the new Louis Vuitton bag. I mean, I work so hard, right? Gotta treat myself. A few people chuckled, nodding along, murmuring things like, of course, you deserve it. And you always have the best taste, Lauren. While I fought the urge to roll my eyes. I had worked 2 jobs, picked up every extra shift I could, sacrificed nights, weekends, relationships, and any hope of having a social life just so she could finish college without worrying about tuition, without drowning in debt, without struggling the way I had. While I was running on fumes, working myself to the bone just to stay afloat, she had been living comfortably, stress-free, oblivious to the fact that her entire lifestyle existed because of me. I took a slow sip of my wine, forcing down the bitterness rising in my throat, reminding myself that I hadn't done it for recognition, hadn't done it for gratitude, hadn't done it because I expected anything in return. I had done it because I was the older sister, because that was what family did, because I had wanted to give her a chance at something better, something easier. But as I listened to her gloat about things she hadn't even earned, things that had only been possible because of my sacrifices, I felt something shift inside me, something I had ignored for too long. Then, one of my uncles, already a few drinks in, turned his attention to me, tilting his head as if he was seeing me for the first time all evening. Emily, he said, blinking in mild confusion, you never go anywhere, do you? Why don't you ever travel? I barely had time to process the question before Lauren let out a short, amused laugh, rolling her eyes like it was the dumbest thing she'd ever heard. Because she's a loser who works all the time, she said, her tone light, joking, casual, like my entire life was something to be laughed at. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence that spread across the table like wildfire, swallowing every conversation, every murmur, every clink of silverware. Someone cleared their throat awkwardly. Someone else shifted in their seat, suddenly uncomfortable. But all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. I felt my jaw tighten, my fingers curling around the stem of my wine glass, the sharp sting of betrayal settling deep in my chest. It wasn't the first time Lauren had taken little digs at me, wasn't the first time she had treated me like I was less than, wasn't the first time she had spoken about me like I was nothing. But it was the first time she had said it so openly, so brazenly, in front of everyone, with no hesitation, no guilt, no awareness of what it even meant. She didn't see me. She had never seen me. Not as the person who had put her through school, not as the person who had covered her rent, not as the person who had sacrificed so much just to make sure she had the life she wanted. To her, I was just someone who worked too much, someone who didn't fit into the world she had built for herself, someone who wasn't worth respecting. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, waiting for me to react, waiting for me to laugh it off, waiting for me to make it easy for everyone to move on. But I didn't laugh. I didn't get angry. I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled. I took another slow sip of my wine, set my glass down carefully, smoothed my hands over my lap, and met Lauren's gaze with a calmness she didn't understand, a calmness that made her blink in slight confusion, the first flicker of uncertainty creeping into her expression. And then, as if her words hadn't just lit a fire inside me, as if she hadn't just sealed her fate in the span of a single sentence, I leaned back in my chair and simply said, "That's funny." Nothing more. Nothing less. Just two little words and a knowing smile. Lauren gave me a weird look, like she was trying to figure out what I meant, like she was trying to decide whether or not I was offended, whether or not she had gone too far. And then, just as quickly, she shrugged and turned her attention back to the conversation, already forgetting the moment ever happened. But I didn't forget. I sat there, silent, smiling, sipping my wine, feeling something inside me settle into place. Because Lauren had no idea. No idea that I was done being used. No idea that her entire life was about to change. No idea that I had just made a decision that would shake the foundation of everything she had built. And by the time she realized it, it would already be too late. The moment I walked out of that restaurant, stepping onto the cool pavement beneath the dim glow of the streetlights, I knew there was no going back, no second chances, no changing my mind about what I was about to do. The bitterness of Lauren's words still clung to my skin like something sticky and unpleasant, something I couldn't quite scrub off no matter how hard I tried, something that made my stomach tighten every time I replayed that moment in my head. It wasn't just what she had said, it was how easily she had said it, how effortlessly she had dismissed me, how casually she had laughed like my entire existence was nothing more than an unfortunate joke. I had been breaking myself for years, splitting my time between two jobs, giving up vacations, relationships, hobbies, any semblance of a normal life just to make sure she had a future, just to make sure she never had to struggle. Never had to know what it felt like to scrape by. Never had to make the impossible choice between paying rent or buying groceries. And for what? So she could sit there in a designer dress I paid for, holding a purse I indirectly funded, mocking me like I was beneath her? That ended tonight. I walked into my apartment, kicked off my shoes, set my purse down, and grabbed my laptop, my fingers moving faster than my thoughts as I logged into my banking apps, pulling up every single payment that had been made in Lauren's name. Every automatic transaction that had quietly drained my account month after month, every financial burden I had taken on for her without so much as a thank you. Her rent? Cancelled. Her car payment? Cancelled. Her credit card bill? Cancelled. Her utilities, her phone bill, her subscription services that she never once thought to pay for herself? All of it. Gone. No warnings. No explanations. No more free ride. I could almost hear her reaction in my head, the way she would scoff and roll her eyes, the way she would tell herself I was just being dramatic, the way she would assume it was just some minor banking error, some temporary inconvenience, something that would fix itself before she ever had to worry about it. She had never lived in a world where things didn't work out for her, had never known what it was like to wake up in a panic, staring at an overdue bill with no way to pay it, had never had to make real sacrifices because I had always been the one making them for her. But that was over, and she was about to learn exactly what that felt like. I waited. I waited as the days passed, as the first of the month came and went, as the payments she had grown so used to magically disappearing from her account never came through. And then, on the third day, my phone buzzed. Lauren's name flashed across the screen, followed by a text so abrupt, so immediately panicked, that I almost laughed at how quickly she had crumbled. What the hell? My rent was declined. I stared at the message for a long moment, letting the satisfaction settle in, letting the weight of the moment truly sink in, letting myself breathe in the first real taste of freedom I had felt in years. Because for the first time in my life, Lauren's problems weren't mine anymore. And I wasn't going to lift a single finger to fix them. The first call came at 7 in the morning, too early for anyone to be calling unless something was wrong, but I ignored it, letting my phone buzz on my nightstand while I stared at the ceiling, waiting for it to go to voicemail. The second call came less than 5 minutes later, then a third, then a fourth, the vibrations rattling against the wooden surface, filling the quiet of my apartment with a desperate kind of urgency. I already knew who it was, and I already knew exactly what she wanted. By the time my phone went silent, I rolled over, checking my messages, unsurprised to see Lauren's name plastered across my screen, followed by a string of texts, each one more frantic than the last. Emily, I think something's wrong with the bank. Call me. My rent still hasn't gone through. My landlord just texted me. WTF, my credit card got declined at lunch? Call me. Now. I smirked, tossing my phone aside, stretching my arms over my head as I settled deeper into my blankets, feeling lighter, freer, more at peace than I had in years. It was almost funny, almost laughable, how quickly her world had crumbled the moment I stopped being the foundation holding it up. Another call. Another voicemail. Another text. Lauren was spiraling, clinging to the belief that this was just some mistake, some misunderstanding, some temporary inconvenience that could be solved with a quick phone call. And I let her panic. I let her sit in it. I let her feel the exact helplessness I had felt every time I had picked up an extra shift, every time I had canceled plans, every time I had put my own needs second just so she could live comfortably without ever knowing what it cost. It wasn't until the 10th call that I finally answered, my voice perfectly calm, perfectly controlled, perfectly indifferent. Hello? Emily, Lauren breathed, her voice already shaking, already carrying the uneven edge of someone barely holding it together. I think there's a problem with the bank. None of my bills are going through. I leaned back against my pillows, pressing the phone closer to my ear, letting the silence stretch just long enough for her to squirm, just long enough for her to think I was about to offer her a solution, just long enough for her to believe that I still cared enough to fix this for her. And then, with the slowest, sweetest satisfaction curling in my chest, I said, "No problem. Just not my problem anymore." Silence. A sharp inhale. A pause so heavy I could feel her mind racing through every possible explanation, every possible way to convince herself that she had just misheard me. "What?" she finally whispered, her voice brittle, uneven, cracking at the edges. I smiled, taking my time with my response, letting her sit in the weight of her own words, of her own arrogance, of the moment she had unknowingly burned the only bridge she had left. I repeated, my voice slow, deliberate, dripping with quiet amusement, "It's not my problem anymore, Lauren. Hope you figure it out." Her sharp intake of breath came through the phone so loudly that I could almost see the way her entire body tensed, the way her grip on her perfect little life started to slip through her fingers, the way she realized, maybe for the first time in her life, that she was completely, utterly alone. "Wait," she sputtered, her voice shifting, changing, twisting into something softer, more careful, more calculated. "Emily, come on, don't do this. If this is about dinner, I was just joking. You know I didn't mean it." "You always take things so seriously," I laughed, not loudly, not mockingly, just enough to let her hear it, just enough to let her know that nothing she said was going to change what had already been done. "Good luck, Lauren," I said, and then, before she could say another word, before she could beg, before she could dig herself deeper into the hole she had created, I hung up. But she wasn't done. Oh no, she wasn't done. Because within the next few hours, the messages started pouring in first, the guilt-tripping, then the blaming, then the outright screaming. A desperate rotation of manipulation tactics that I had seen so many times before, but had never been immune to until now. "I can't believe you're doing this to me. You're being dramatic. You're overreacting. It was a joke, Emily. Get over yourself. Do you even care what happens to me?" I didn't answer. I didn't even read half of them, because none of it mattered anymore. It wasn't until the pounding at my front door started that I realized she had reached the final stage of desperation. I got up slowly, padding toward the door, taking my time, letting her wait, letting her stand on the other side of the threshold, knowing that for the first time, I wasn't the one chasing after her. And when I finally swung the door open, arms crossed, lips curved into a small, knowing smirk, I saw her, standing there, tears streaking her face, her designer bag clutched to her chest, the perfect, polished version of herself completely unraveled. "Oh," I said, tilting my head, letting the satisfaction seep into every syllable. "Now you want to talk?" Lauren's face crumbled. And I had never felt lighter. Lauren stood in my doorway, her eyes wide, red-rimmed, and glistening with unshed tears, her carefully curated confidence now nothing more than a brittle mask that had already begun to crack. The designer bag she clutched to her chest was a stark contrast to the sheer desperation radiating from her posture, her entire body tense, her fingers gripping the leather so tightly that I half expected her manicured nails to tear through the fabric. I didn't invite her in right away. I let her stand there, shifting uncomfortably under my gaze, waiting for me to speak first, waiting for me to tell her it was okay, waiting for me to rescue her like I always had. I leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, studying her for a long, silent moment, letting her feel the weight of the shift between us, letting her feel what it was like to be the one waiting, the one at a disadvantage, the one with no control. "Now you want to talk?" I said, my voice light, amused, mocking in a way she wasn't used to hearing from me. Lauren's breath hitched, her lip trembling just slightly before she bit down on it, forcing herself to stay composed, forcing herself to play the role of the humbled little sister who just needed another chance. "Emily, please," she whispered, her voice deliberately soft, deliberately careful, a tone designed to elicit sympathy, to make me forget everything, to make me feel like I was being cruel. "I don't know what's going on, but I can't do this without you." I tilted my head slightly, raising an eyebrow, pretending to consider her words, pretending to hesitate, pretending that I was debating whether or not I should help her. I wanted her to think she was getting somewhere, wanted her to believe she still had a chance, wanted her to feel that spark of false hope that would make my next move all the more satisfying. "You can't do it without me?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral, watching the way her hands trembled slightly, the way she hated being the one asking for help, the one begging, the one powerless. Lauren swallowed hard, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, her nails tapping against the bag still clutched in her arms, her breathing uneven. I just need a little time," she admitted, her voice laced with forced humility, with manufactured vulnerability. "Just until I figure something out. I didn't think things through, okay? I messed up." I nodded slowly, pushing off the doorframe, taking a deliberate step toward her, watching as her breath hitched, as her eyes searched mine for something, anything that would tell her I was going to fix everything for her like I always had. "All right," I said, exhaling as if I had just made a difficult decision, as if I had just decided to be the bigger person. Relief washed over her face so fast it was almost comical, her shoulders sagging, her fingers loosening their death grip on the bag, her breath coming out in a shuddering exhale as she convinced herself she had won. "Really?" she asked, blinking up at me, her voice suddenly lighter, suddenly hopeful, suddenly returning to that soft, sweet tone she used whenever she wanted something. I smiled. "But there's a condition," I said, keeping my voice casual, keeping my expression unreadable, keeping my amusement buried just beneath the surface. Lauren hesitated, her fingers twitching, her relief dimming just slightly. "A condition?" she echoed, her voice wary, like she already knew she wasn't going to like what came next. I shrugged, acting as if it wasn't a big deal, acting as if this was just a minor request, just a small favor, just a simple exchange. "You have to tell the family the truth," I said, my tone even, my eyes locked onto hers, watching as she froze in place, as every muscle in her body went rigid, as her carefully rehearsed act faltered. "The truth?" she repeated, her voice weak, uncertain, like she was hoping she had misheard me, like she was waiting for me to laugh and say I was joking. I nodded. "You tell them that you've been living off me for years," I said, enunciating each word carefully, deliberately, letting them sink in, letting her feel them settle like stones in her stomach. Tell them that every shopping spree, every trip, every piece of your perfect little life was paid for by me. Tell them that you called me a loser while sitting there in a dress I paid for, drinking wine I covered, pretending like you weren't completely dependent on me. Lauren's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard, her eyes darting away from mine, her lips parting slightly, like she wanted to argue, like she wanted to tell me I was being unreasonable, like she wanted to find some way out of this. But there was no way out. Not this time. Not anymore. You do that, I continued, keeping my voice gentle, almost soothing, and I'll think about helping you. Lauren exhaled shakily, nodding, clearly hating every second of this, but knowing she didn't have another choice. Fine, she muttered, her voice clipped, resentful. I grinned, pulling my phone from my pocket, my fingers gliding over the screen as I typed out a quick message, my final move already in play. Great, I said, pressing send before slipping my phone back into my pocket, watching as Lauren's expression twisted with suspicion. She opened her mouth to ask what I had just done, but before she could, her own phone vibrated loudly in her bag, followed by another buzz and another, each one signaling a new incoming message. Lauren hesitated, then slowly pulled her phone out, unlocking it with shaky fingers, her brows furrowing as she stared at the screen, her eyes scanning the notification that had just been sent to every single member of our family. Dinner's on me tonight. Everyone come. Lauren's head snapped up, her face draining of color. And I smiled, because she had no idea what was coming next. The restaurant was buzzing with conversation, the low murmur of voices filling the air as servers weaved between tables, balancing trays of food and refilling drinks for guests who had no idea that they were about to witness the most satisfying downfall in family history. I sat at the head of the long table, my expression carefully neutral, my posture relaxed, my hands wrapped around the stem of my wine glass as I waited for the show to begin. As I listened to the mindless chatter of my aunts and uncles who were completely unaware of what I had planned for the evening. Lauren had no idea either. She walked in 15 minutes late, wearing one of her signature designer dresses, the kind she loved to flaunt, the kind she had never paid for with her own money. The kind that had been indirectly funded by the years I had spent breaking my back to keep her afloat. She took her time making her way to the table, offering air kisses to our relatives, flashing that perfectly practiced smile, the one that made her look like she had everything under control, the one that fooled people into believing she was the picture of effortless success. She thought she was winning. She thought she had gotten through to me, thought I had caved, thought I had invited everyone here tonight to make peace, to smooth things over, to go back to the way things were. She had no idea. She slid into the seat across from me, offering me a tight smile, her fingers smoothing out the napkin on her lap, her posture straight, poised, every inch of her exuding the forced elegance of someone who is trying desperately to maintain an illusion. "Emily," she said sweetly, tilting her head slightly, her voice laced with careful politeness. "Thanks for setting this up. I know things have been a little tense, but it means a lot that you're willing to move past it." I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the pause stretch long enough for her to shift uncomfortably, long enough for her to wonder why I wasn't saying anything back. Then I smiled. "Oh, don't mention it," I said lightly, setting my glass down, folding my hands in front of me as I leaned forward slightly. "I just thought it was time everyone knew the truth." Lauren's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, so quickly that most people wouldn't have noticed, but I did. I saw the way her fingers twitched against the napkin, the way her throat bobbed as she swallowed, the way her eyes flickered with the first spark of uncertainty. But she recovered fast. "Right," she said, forcing a small chuckle, shifting in her seat, adjusting the necklace around her neck, the one I had paid for. I was actually thinking the same thing. It's probably time we clear up all the confusion. I know things got a little exaggerated, but I held up a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence, watching as she blinked in mild surprise, watching as she realized, maybe for the first time, that she wasn't in control of this conversation. "I actually have something to share," I said, Reaching into my bag, pulling out the neatly organized stack of papers I had printed earlier that day, my heart thrumming in anticipation as I placed them on the table. Since we're talking about the truth and all. Lauren's breath hitched slightly, her lips parting, her eyes flickering down to the documents, but she didn't reach for them. So I did. I picked up the first page, turning it so that the entire table could see the bold letters at the top. Rental agreement, paid monthly by Emily Carter. Silence. Complete and utter silence. Lauren's smile was gone. I flipped to the next page, a credit card statement in my name, linked to an account she had used for years, filled with luxury store transactions, high-end restaurant bills, vacation expenses, all charged by her, all paid by me. Then another, her car payment records, each one attached to my account, each one a reminder of the thousands of dollars I had funneled into her lifestyle while she sat there in that restaurant, laughing at me for being nothing more than a loser who worked all the time. Gasps. Murmurs. A sharp inhale from my aunt. Lauren's entire body went rigid, her eyes darting wildly around the table, her chest rising and falling too quickly, her carefully applied makeup suddenly not enough to hide the panic beneath. "You've been broke for years, Lauren," I said, my voice calm, steady, sharp enough to cut through the tension now suffocating the table. "Every dress, every trip, every expensive dinner you've bragged about, it's all been paid for by me." I let the weight of my words settle, let them sink into her skin, let her feel the humiliation spread like wildfire through the room. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." And then, finally, Lauren found her voice. "Emily," she breathed, her voice shaking, barely above a whisper, her eyes pleading, begging me to stop. "Can we talk about this privately?" I tilted my head, feigning confusion, pretending I didn't see the way her hands were trembling beneath the table. "Oh, but why?" I asked, widening my eyes slightly, keeping my voice light, almost playful. "I thought you said I was being dramatic? That I was overreacting? That I was a loser?" Lauren opened her mouth, then closed it again, completely at a loss for words. And then, as she sat there, trapped in the mess she had created, drowning in the reality she had refused to acknowledge, I stood up slowly, smoothing out the wrinkles in my dress, reaching for my purse. I turned toward her one last time, watching as she stared back at me with wide, horrified eyes, watching as she finally realized that she had no one left to save her. And then, with a small, satisfied smirk, I said, "Good luck out there." And I walked away, leaving her to deal with the wreckage of the life she had pretended to have. The messages started coming in the very next morning, piling up one after another, desperate, frantic, spiraling between denial and anger, confusion and regret, blame and self-pity. I had expected it, had known the second I walked out of that restaurant that Lauren wouldn't go down quietly, wouldn't just accept the consequences of her actions, wouldn't simply let go of the life she had convinced herself she was entitled to. At first, she tried playing it off, pretending the night before had been nothing more than a dramatic misunderstanding, pretending that I had overreacted, pretending that the exposure of her financial dependency had been a cruel joke blown out of proportion. "Emily, come on. You didn't have to do that in front of everyone. It was a mistake. Let's just move past it, okay? You know I didn't mean what I said. You're being so dramatic." I didn't respond. I barely even read them. By the second day, the messages had shifted. Her tone had changed, her words sharper, her patience thinning, the false sweetness fading as her desperation cracked through the surface. "This is your fault. You humiliated me. You think you're so much better than me, don't you? After everything I've done for you, you just cut me off like I'm nothing?" That last one made me laugh. Everything she had done for me? I let my phone buzz, let it vibrate against the counter, let the texts pile up, let the missed calls stack one on top of the other, let Lauren sit in the very same silence she had left me in all those years when I was the one struggling. Because now, the difference was clear. For years, I had been drowning, but I had never expected her to save me. Now, she was drowning. And she expected me to pull her out of the water. But I didn't. By the end of the week, her carefully constructed life had completely collapsed. Her landlord wasn't interested in excuses, the rent was due, and she had nothing to pay it with. Her credit cards were maxed out, her phone service was on the verge of being disconnected, her car was suddenly too expensive to maintain, her designer bags and shoes suddenly useless in a world where she had no actual money. And worse? Her friends, the ones who had wined and dined with her on my dime, the ones who had gasped in awe at her extravagant vacations and her expensive outfits, the ones who had fed off her lifestyle like parasites clinging to a host, were gone. The moment they realized she had nothing left to offer, they abandoned her. Not one of them stepped in to help, not one of them offered to cover her rent, not one of them gave her the sympathy she had expected, because people like that only stick around when there's something in it for them. And just like that, Lauren was alone. I, on the other hand, was finally free. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I was living for myself, not for her, not for anyone else. I packed a bag, booked a vacation I had put off for years, and hopped on a flight without telling anyone, without asking for permission, without feeling the weight of someone else's problems pulling me down. I sat on the beach with the sun warming my skin, with the waves rolling in gently against the shore, with a cocktail in one hand and my phone on Do Not Disturb, blocking out the world, blocking out the past, blocking out the version of myself that had once believed it was my responsibility to carry someone who had never once thought to carry me. I sighed, letting the ocean breeze tangle through my hair, letting the moment sink in, letting the silence feel like peace instead of punishment. And then, just as I was about to take another sip of my drink, my phone buzzed. A single notification. A single voicemail. From Lauren. I stared at the screen, watching the notification sit there, waiting for me, waiting for a response that would never come, waiting for me to open the door she had slammed shut the moment she called me a loser. I didn't listen to it. I didn't need to. I deleted it without hesitation, tossing my phone onto the lounge chair beside me, exhaling deeply as I let the weight of my final decision settle into my bones. I had given her everything, and now I had given her nothing. For the first time, she would have to figure it out on her own. For the first time, I didn't care if she did.